defenseless people that were shot by military weapons. They are chasing them now in hospitals, finishing the job of wounded people, raping women in their homes. The amount of brutality that has happened has been unprecedented, but the resolve of my compatriot is still there. It started from the bazaar in Tehran and quickly spread to the four corners of Iran. Millions of people came out. Millions of people started protesting death to the dictator, asking for their liberty.
Excitement on the horizon in what's happening in Iran. Let's hear from the most prominent exiled, Reza Pahlavi, the son of the former Shah, the head of Iran, who has been exiled. Let's listen to him as he shares with us of what's really happening on the ground in live time.
So you have called on the Iranian people to rise up and oppose this regime. A lot of Iranians are doing that. A lot of them are being killed by the regime. Are you confident that this uprising will work?
Jake, first and foremost, I must say that unlike previous campaigns, and as a continuation of it, this time the people came to the streets because they have had it with this regime. It's a true revolution. But the regime, unfortunately, has started waging war against its own citizenry. Defenseless people that were shot by military weapons, they are chasing them now in hospitals, finishing the job of wounded people, raping women in their homes. The amount of brutality that has happened has been unprecedented, but the resolve of my compatriot is still there. It started from the bazaar in Tehran and quickly spread to the four corners of Iran. Millions of people came out. Millions of people started protesting death to the dictator, asking for their liberty. And this is a movement that will ultimately succeed. We had a stumbling block, which was the regime panicking, cutting us from the world by shutting down the internet, making communication impossible. But the news has trickled out. And as of yesterday, when I spoke to a few of our political prisoners, they were telling us the amount of casualties that we thought would be not as much as was originally reported, but Tehran alone had over 15,000 people killed, and I think across the country is well over 20,000, maybe even more than that.
Obviously, it's the fault of the regime, and we all hope that the Iranian people get the government they deserve and democracy and freedom. Obviously, it's the fault of the regime, all these deaths, but do you feel any responsibility having called for this uprising?
Well, they called me to step in. Millions of people chanted my name, asking for my leadership, for my return, and it is in support of the movement that we called for maximum togetherness so that they are not spread as a crowd. And it started pushing back elements with the regime. As a result of it, we started to see some initial refusal to go back to work. There were members of the police force who didn't show up to work, some military elements. Even the regime killed a few policemen who refused to engage with the people. So we already see the momentum shifting. The regime panicked and as a result created this blackout. But the momentum might have slowed down in terms of people be able to continue beyond the street. But we know that once the regime is hopefully targeted in terms of its force of repression being neutralized, if indeed, as President Trump announced, there will be some retaliation for them doing what they did to the people, that will give people another opportunity to then finish the job at the end. People are committed to do that. Millions of people have died. And you know the biggest message that they wanted me to convey to our viewers is that they are not fighting this fight for themselves. They are fighting for humanity and liberty all around the world. That's the Iranian people who are, unlike this regime, has always been anti-Western, anti-American principle. Iranians want to have the best of relationship with America. And we had it before.
And you know that there are a lot of Iranians who hate the regime who are also critics of yours. And I want to give you an opportunity to respond to some of their criticism. One of them is that you say you want to unite the Iranian people, but you weren't able to keep a coalition of like-minded Iranians together at Georgetown. That group quickly disbanded. Why do you think you're going to be able to unite the country?
Well, first of all, you have right causes and the wrong players. But when I was in Munich 3 months ago, we had a conference that had the widest spread and diversity of representation of its kind as part of the unity movement. We had people from the left, people from the right, Republicans, monarchists, socialists, representative of ethnic groups, representative of religious minorities, athletes, artists that were all gathered there. And the principle is very simple, Jake. What are we united on in terms of the core principles?
Ending the regime.
But there are four key principles that you said like-minded. How do we define it? First and foremost is Iran territorial integrity, which is very important. Number two is separation of church from state as a prerequisite to democracy. Number three is, of course, equality under the law of all citizens and individual liberties. And all of this so we can conduct free elections, so it's the Iranian people who determine the outcome. I'm stepping in as a leader of transition at their call. My job is to make sure that we can see this through. We have a plan for the post-regime collapse to stabilize the situation, allow maximum defections, keep the most of the bureaucracy intact so the country continues functioning, and then prepare the grounds for the election of a constitutional assembly where whatever opinions people may have, they have a chance to debate it and be presented with a constitutional project and then be ratified by referendum.
On that matter of continuity in government, last summer, July, you announced that more than 50,000 officials from the military, from the Iranian government, had submitted to a Google form that you set up that they wanted to defect from the current regime. Did you verify those numbers? Do those names, is the number still 50,000? And where have those defectors gone? What happened to them?
It's more than that. 2 days before the internet shutdown, we have over 100,000 people, new applicants to a platform that we had created a few months before, adding to the numbers that had already started joining. Among them, you find members of the military, paramilitary, police forces, but also a lot of people who are in the civil bureaucracy, working in ministries and so on and so forth. Diplomats and others, and we're beginning to see signs of more and more people, refusing to go back to work or literally defecting. It is very important because it's part of our process. You see, one of the lessons learned from de-Baathification in Iraq was really a bad example of how you manage a change of regime. And in the case of Iran, you don't have the problem you saw happen there in the de-Baathification. We are trying to be inclusive as much as possible of all those who can survive regime change and have a place in the future, except for the people who have their hands soiled with the blood of the Iranians, and they will have a count in the court of justice at some point. But the majority of them can survive that change and have a place for them tomorrow.
So lastly, sir, President Trump's position vis-a-vis the Iranian people, he keeps threatening that he'll take action if the Iranian regime keeps killing innocent Iranians. They keep killing innocent Iranians. At one point he said, I was told the killing stopped, but it hasn't.
Unfortunately, it hasn't.
Do you think what he's doing, his position, separate and apart from the nuclear strikes, has been helpful? Is it beneficial?
It's the expectation of a nation, because a lot of people took courage in the words of a president who said, I'm not going to be another Barack Obama. I'm not going to throw you under the bus. And people took that very seriously. And in fact, a lot of people now are hoping that in this totally unfair conflict where the regime is massacring them and they have no choice to defend themselves because they are unarmed, something is going to tilt the balance in their favor. And the best way to do that and save lives at the same time is to strike the regime when they are the most vulnerable and at the same time their instrument of repression. We're talking IRGC, we're talking instances that is collectively their instrument of repression, but there can also be additional aspect to that, economic isolation of the regime. And I think a lot of governments now in Europe are considering bringing even more sanctions on the regime. This is a time to act. I think the expectation of the people who have bravely gone to the street, many of them have died, that they haven't died in vain. They expect the world this time, beyond just condemnation, behind resolution, actually take steps to put the pressure on the regime.
So just to be clear, you're saying that you think it's time for the U.S. and the West to act beyond just words with economic sanctions that are tougher, but also military strikes against the Revolutionary Guard.
There's no other way to help unarmed people when they're facing this level of brutality that the regime has exerted against them. The only chance is to see a cavalry that arrives and we can hold the fort up to a point. At some point, we need to get that air cover, and that will change the balance in favor of the people. Okay. Hopefully, Iranians will be able to liberate themselves.
All right, Reza Pahlavi, thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
What an amazing interview, and thank you so much. It's been so many years in the making since Mr., as they known as Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, has been anticipating and waiting for this moment to happen. Since 1979, when his father, the Shah, was exiled, Iran went from living in total liberty and freedoms into total captivity. 90 million Iranians lost their human rights and their religious freedom. When this deadly regime took over. The radical Islamists took over Iran, and they began executing by the thousands for minor infractions on religious basis. People no longer had religious freedom. And this is something that does not belong in the 21st century. Religious freedom is a right for every human being to be able to practice whatever religion they chose. Religion is about faith. It's about being committed to God and being godly and acting godly. Religion has no place when it comes to taking another person's rights away or by persecuting or worse, killing people in the name of religion. And that is what has been happening since 1979. When we listen to the Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, there is a sense of optimism that he has, that he's hoping for. He did mention that prior to the outage of the internet, there were thousands of those who joined the movement, both from the government, from the army, and from other sectors. And this is something new that has shown that the homegrown opposition to the government is growing stronger and stronger. But what's happening in Iran, the peril of the Iranian people that are there, it's not just about the 90 million Iranians that are suffering from this tyranny, but it's also the rest of the world. We now know Iran's reach was not just regional in the Middle East, but it has its stretch throughout the world, as far as Australia. When a synagogue was bombed, the Australian government expelled the Iranian consulate because we found ties from Iran to the bombing of the synagogue in Australia. During the last 2 years of the Gaza war, when the mantras, the rhetoric was being allowed to be chanted on the streets of cities, on the college campuses, whether it was about free Palestine from the river to the sea, or the globalization of the Intifada. Well, yes, the Intifada is now globalized, not only in a synagogue that was firebombed in Australia, but look what just happened on December 14, 2025, the first night of Hanukkah in Bondi Beach, Sydney, Australia. This is very close and personal to myself personally, because the event that happened on Bondi Beach on the first night of Hanukkah was an event that my brother-in-law and my youngest sister hosted for the last 40 years. Being that Australia is always the first to welcome in the New Year's, always the first to welcome in new seasons, new holidays, because of their time zone, they were always the first. Oh, every New Year's, the Opera House fireworks are the first to usher in, herald in the New Year's. So my brother-in-law and youngest sister always hosted the very first Hanukkah candle. Their son-in-law, Rabbi Eli Schlenger, who was his assistant and administrator, was putting together this beautiful program. A large majority of the attendees were former refugees of the former Soviet Union. And that is my brother-in-law, who was born in Russia, was appointed to be the rabbi of the Russian Jewish community to help them get resettled in Sydney, Australia, that he has done triumphantly, beautifully in the course of the last 40 years. So the majority of the people that were there were those that fled Russia because of the persecution that they were subjected to because of their religion. And they came to Australia to feel safe and to feel secure. That was true until December 14, 2025, when they gathered and getting ready to light the very first candle, heralding in the Hanukkah season of 2025. The symbol of Hanukkah is a symbol of 2,000 years ago, was the very first religious war that happened on the soil of Israel. Yes, the Jewish people were living in Israel 2,000 years ago. That's years before the great-grandfather of Muhammad was even conceived. Yes, the Jewish people are the indigenous people, the natural people who lived in Israel for thousands of years. As they were getting ready this year to light the menorah, a father and a son, Islamists, Muslim, devout, ISIS inspired, took two heavy, very powerful rifles and shot and killed as many people as they tried to. 15 people were shot dead, including my very own nephew, Rabbi Eli Schlinger, 41 years old, leaving behind a widow, my niece, and 5 beautiful children, the youngest being 2 months old. This is the result of the Islamist, of radical Islam, a jihadist that is born and bred on the soil of Iran. This is the war that we are up against. And this is why it is so important for the world to come together and support the counter-revolutionaries who are trying so hard. Now, the one big question we ought to ask ourselves, where are the protests in the streets? Iran just massacred close to 30,000 innocent civilians. Where's the world outcry? Why isn't the United Nations gathering together and drawing up condemnations? Why aren't there protests in the streets? Why isn't the Harbor Bridge in Sydney packed with thousands and thousands of people chanting against the Iranian government for massacring 30,000 Iranians, innocent Iranians? Where are the encampments on the campus? Where are the flotillas? Where's Greta? Where's everybody? How come it's quiet? Why is there such silence in the world versus mass protests, at least equally to what happened during the Gaza war? You know what the answer is? Because these aren't Israelis. It's not the Jews. Only when the Jews are fighting for their survival are they to be called all these names of genociders, baby killers, as we have heard over the last 2 years. Ask yourself the question, doesn't it make sense to you now? Why is there no outcry about these 30,000 innocent Iranians that was just killed? And that is what anti-Semitism is all about. And this is exactly what's happening right now in Iran. We have an opportunity now, the free world has an opportunity now to help topple this regime and get rid of this radical Islamists whose only mission in life is, their mission statement is, death to America, death to Israel, death to the West. And we need to believe them because that is what they believe. And we have learned from history, when your enemy wants to kill you, they mean it. Well, now we have a chance to challenge that. We see what happened with the blackout of the internet. Sorry. And we see what happens with 90 million people who are basically held in one huge concentration camp by this regime. They deserve to be freed. They deserve to have their religious rights restored and the human rights restored. Before 1979, these people were living a free life. But those of us who know, who have been living in Iran prior to 1979, know that their relations with Israel and the West were as tight as ever. They were allies. Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, whether he's going to be the next leader of a democracy and will be voted in with a true democracy or not, but he made a pledge. He made it very clear that when Iran gets its liberties back and a democratic government is once again installed and leading the world with a democracy, then the very first thing he wants to do is to renew the relations with Israel and the West and America. Wouldn't that be an incredible 180 from the chanting that goes on now, death to America, death to Israel, of having diplomatic relations with Israel and becoming an ally of Israel in the United States? This is attainable and it's doable. We can make this happen. We need to support those protesters, the anti-revolutionary. We need to be there for them and do whatever we can to help them. Those 30,000 who just got killed in the last 3 weeks, their deaths cannot be in vain. We need to hold our hands together in prayer and pray to God that this should be the beginning. This should be a watershed moment of history where the world can witness how the axis of evil will be eliminated and neutralized. It's so doable and so attainable. Let's pray and we hope that this can happen. Not only are we going to free 90 million people from the people of Iran, but it's also going to change the whole landscape in the Middle East and throughout the world. Just imagine peace in the Middle East, peace with Iran, which means they're no longer going to be funding terrorism, not to Hezbollah, not to Hamas, not to the Houthis. No longer would they be a state sponsored of terrorism, but only goodness and kindness from the 90 million people that will be free. And we pray and we hope that we can witness that happen speedily in our days. Amen. God bless you. God loves you.